Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. You're responsible for the contents of your unconscious. That's the bad news Edenity offers, but your reward is nothing less than the retrieval of your very soul in so doing. Rabbit holes today include why some people are attracted to immortality, more comedy offered by the leaders of our world, how many shakes of the penis constitutes masturbation according to the Catholic Church, and a poem by yours truly about trigger warnings. Also, some big news, the new website Edenity.org is live. If you're curious about what you read on the new website and here in the podcast, Stace and Bree are available live on Zoom every 2 months. They will answer your questions, help with confusions, hold space for your feelings, and provide reflections. The first one will take place on Thursday, December 7, that's 2023. You can register for those curiosity circles on the event page of Edenity.org. Thanks so much for listening. Greetings and welcome forward, everybody. This is Deja Vu for Stace and I. Hello, Stace, because hi.
Good afternoon.
I can't recall. We haven't done it in a long time. Recorded twice in 2 days. It's been a while, so you'd think we'd be right back in the swing of things. But I feel like we're doing our first episode yet again. And I want to start with related to that we recorded the last episode yesterday, which was a sainthood episode about. We talked a lot about surrendering to life outcomes. It was around 8 o'clock last night when I heard one of my cats meowing somewhere between intrigue and anger underneath the house. And on Maui has an enormous feral cat problem. So I figure, it's probably a feral cat. And I tried to find where the conflict might have happened because one of my cats is quite wimpy and could be injured by a feral cat. And I crawled all the way into the house. This is like a half hour before my bedtime with a flashlight, and discovered that in the standoff, my cat was obviously dominating. All I could see was a little bit of the tail of the opposing cat, who was up on top of a pipe in order to escape being attacked. And so I was like, okay, well, if it's a feral cat, then my cat Popo is going to be the winner here. So I'll just not deal with it. And then about a half hour later, I hear all this plaintive mewing. I couldn't even call it meowing. And I discover it's a kitten. And the kitten is extremely friendly. I'm able to touch her in about 5 or 10 minutes, and she's starving, and I feed her. And it's like, okay, am I going to take her in? Like, it's bedtime for me. I don't want to have to make a litter box, pull those things out of storage. So I'll just leave some food and water here. And if she's still here in the morning, then, I'll take her in. So presenting Diva. This is who I'm calling Diva. Say hello to everybody. She's a little shy. This cat looked right into my soul this morning. And so, yeah, she's doing it right now.
Yeah.
See what I mean? She's got all three hoods, I think.
She's certainly claiming ownership of you. Yes.
Totally right. So on the subject of surrendering to outcomes, I feel very much claimed. I didn't feel like I had much of a choice in this. I just kept taking the next step and then the next step. And I found myself planning, okay, when do I take her to the vet? And I was like, wait a minute, have I decided this? I didn't decide that, but the decision decided. So
yes.
Now I have a third cat, it seems. Provided she doesn't have a microchip. I'll find out at the vet if she does. So anyway, that's my little sainthood show and tell. And we are here today to be talking about, 17, 18. We're close to the end of this list. We're talking about that you are responsible for the contents of your unconscious, which is one of the three main first principles of Edenity, right?
Yes.
Or is it first principles of, oh no, it's not just personhood, because and those three are, if we can remember them, your response. Don't tell me. I'm always 2 for 3 on these.
I am too, usually.
You're responsible for the contents of your unconscious. The self is sacred of and to itself. And see, I can only ever get 2. Do you
We
know the
are,
third?
yes, we are emotive beings
Ah,
before we are willful, energetic, mental, and physical beings.
yes,
Yeah.
right. So we're that's what we're talking about today. And we've talked about this one before, but we're gonna do a deeper dive on it. Any ideas where you want to start today?
Well, yeah, it's this is part of the triad foundation of identity for a really specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though Freud and Jung and Adler and the boys back then, even Anne Freud later, were talking about the unconscious. Jung was the best articulator of the general unconscious. Freud sexualized the unconscious, of course, in the way that he did, where a cigar is not always a cigar. And so Jung was really clear that when he was holding his Eastern kinds of paradigms overlaid onto Freud and his original explorations of psychology, he was really clear that you don't raise your energy by what you're conscious of, but by illuminating what you're not conscious of. That's a
Mm-hmm.
paraphrase, of course, in one of his more famous quotes. And when identity looks at all the paradigms out there, East and West, traditional and modern, psycho-spiritual and religious, all the paradigms of growth and change, 98% are only focused on what you're conscious of.
And then seek to
And
construct on top of that to make you a better human being, whatever that means to the
exactly,
paradigm. You know?
their foundation is on what's conscious to you. And of course, they would acknowledge, if pressed, that you have to unfold some things that are you're not aware of in order to grow and change. But that's a very different, more shallow swimming in the fact that we have an entirely different take that basically up to 2/3 of your consciousness is unconscious to you. Not this is a far bigger percentage than the operating modalities of most paradigms of growth and change. They'll acknowledge the unconscious, but it's basically kind of a bother to get to. In standard therapy, they try to find by association. They try to find with Rorschach blocks, all sorts of ways to get at what's unconscious. But that's all. That's really not the forward reality in that big of a percentage for
Yeah,
identity.
a few months ago, I read Freud's paper, "The Unconscious," called "The Unconscious" in 1915, and most of it. And he wrote this question, like there's this big buildup to the question: how do you make the unconscious conscious? And what I was struck with was how really uninterested most of psychology would
Yes.
then become, and that it's
Yes.
literally the most important question in the
Right.
history of consciousness
Yes.
because it's
Yes.
upstream of our relationship with spirit. It's
Yes.
really more important than what's the nature of God or how do I abide with it, because that question has to come first, at least according to identity.
Yes.
And then behaviorism would follow, which is ask the question, how do I ignore my unconscious and trick myself into behaving how I want to? That's what the whole
Oh
paradigm,
God.
that's what that
Oh.
paradigm is based on.
Oh, that's really such a brilliantly simple way to begin the divergence of identity from all these other
Yeah.
paradigms of growth and change. Right?
Yeah.
It's literally the most fundamental question because without that, all you will do is burnish your way to
Mm-hmm.
a different version of yourself based on all sorts of assumptions that never take into account the depth, breadth, and height of our unconscious sea of disowned and repressed material. So, identity immediately, as soon as the framework started unfolding in me, it was really clear that, okay, what's the reason? At first, it was really clear that when I looked at people and sensed them through both fourth chakra and sixth chakra, I could see, since I was a kid, that virtually the conscious personality of my parents and all their friends and all the adult world I was introduced to, I could see that there was a huge difference between what was coming out of the hole in their face
Yeah.
and what was really going on behind their brain.
And
behind their conscious brain.
I always look for opportunities to normalize you and identity, so that people don't think that you're trying to be some extra special guru person. I heard Adyashanti say the exact same thing, and I think it's not an uncommon. Well, it's not a common experience, but it's not like a unique experience for a very
No.
conscious child to have that experience of like,
Right.
I never registered it that clearly. I just had this deep sense something was wrong. I didn't get that
Sure.
adults were
Yeah.
false that way.
Yeah.
But I've read a number of teachers say things like that.
Yeah. When if you're born with that capacity, it becomes literally an insane human
Yeah, it's
world,
maddening. Yeah.
completely maddening. And so the more I developed my own observational and sensational aspects, sensational meaning senescence, not senescence, sensibilities. Now I'm getting old now, senescently, yes, but it
What's
was really
senescence? Like senility?
senescence, old age. Yeah, it's
Oh, I didn't know that word.
yeah, the process of getting old when you're becoming senescent. Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay,
At
I
any
didn't know
rate,
that.
the culprit. Okay, so if we take that assumption, that offering by identity that we're up to 2/3 of unconscious material that's driving our conscious intentions and actions, that we have motives in the darkness or in the shadow, we could say, as we've been conditioned to refer to it as. And but what became clear is that when you merge, that we have that much unconscious and that we're emotive beings first, together those kind of become a gestalt of, well, if we're emotive beings first, owing from the fact of our emoto soulful progeny of a love-based divine being, then the material in the unconscious is going to be primarily emotive also. That was the next realization. Mm-hmm. And then once the realization was there and some of the backup experiences I started to have with that, checking that out, then it became clear that there were two versions of our human selfhood, really directly. Not first, it was the unconscious versus the conscious, but then it became clear that what was behind that duality was a soul consciousness versus an adaptive, conditioned local consciousness. And so
when did that show up for you? I don't remember hearing you talk about this.
Yeah, following the non-dual event.
So when you saw the first architecture of the emotional body, you had a sense that there was a soul behind all of that, or at the bottom of what we call the egg.
Uh-huh. Yes, exactly right. Because the wipe of the mental faculties that lasted about 6 weeks or so fully made room for the spiritual context that the pre-dual or non-dual is an aspect of, which of course would give a Zen master a metaphysical migraine.
Right. You saw an essential self after trying to wipe away all of it.
Exactly. And I was successful in getting it wiped away for a while, 6-7 weeks at max. And then it thundered back into perspective, as I've said in other podcasts, which was completely mysterious to me, shocking to me, because I thought myself and the divinity that I'd baked with my whole life up until that event was basically all just a projection of wombed consciousness of mommy while you're still in the womb. That's what God was. But boy, when it yanked back, just barreled back into, while I was mid-sentence at a satsang, everything twisted and turned and spun, and I barely was able to hold standing up, and I had to sit down. And then finally went back to my teacher, who had proclaimed me, Abba Dabadu, go find your own satsang, and went back to him and said, I've got this combination thing going on. And as we said several times, I think in the podcast series, he said, well, either I misread your enlightenment, or you've got something going on that we haven't described before.
Which is really remarkable that he said that. It was truly unattached.
truly, he never he would the only I only know of one thing he took any sort of non-negotiable position on, only one thing, and that was that he preferred potato chips more than any other food. But that again was a preference, but it became basically a position of existential
Yeah, if you're gonna have an unmovable position, then
yeah,
potato chips.
right.
Was he? Here's a question I never asked. Was he particular about his brand of potato chips, or could it be any kind of chip?
Oh God, I never saw them with those Pringle manufactured off a factory looking
Yeah.
things. They
So
were always
yeah,
irregular. So it was
uh,
probably Jay's or Lay's potato chips,
Lay's. Yeah,
probably.
yeah, yeah.
That was
Just
back in
curious.
the late 80s. So yeah, it probably
Yeah.
was Lay's potato
3 out of
chips.
4 Zen masters prefer Lay's. Three
Right.
out of four prefer, right? But are not
Yeah.
attached to in parentheses.
Every satsang, his handlers, two or three of them, they would always have this big white bowl. I mean, this big white bowl of potato chips for him to munch on
He
during
would eat them
satsangs.
while he was
Oh
teaching.
yeah, absolutely. That's how engaged, disengaged he was from actual human interaction in that way. But he was scorched earth. And I was so lucky to find him. I thought I'd have to go to Nepal to
Mm-hmm.
find such a one. But that's exactly how the Buddha was. The Buddha would never align himself with any position that precluded its opposite. You'd think this is de rigueur, de facto for Zen masters, but they are chock full of non-negotiable absolute positionalities
Yeah,
that
Adida, for example, was quite
oh, oh
opinionated for
uh,
being awake and kind of excessively passionate and
exactly. The most glaring one of which is that the personal self is an illusion, and that is non-negotiable
yeah,
across the board. The Buddha would never say that. He would simply say you can't experience the personal self except as a co-arising mutuality with experience, which Zen masters teach, but then say as an absolute that the self is an illusion, not this in between kind of gentle, undefinable river verb,
and the
as
defense would
opposed.
be that they're saying that just to help you wake up, it's not absolute truth, it's a strategy. But as we've said before, well, then why do you have to say something different in order to wake
Right.
someone up than what the metaphysics of your paradigm? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot you don't have a paradigm that is a paradigm.
I forgot you don't have metaphysics either. Right.
Right, because as soon as they're incoherent, then they just dissipate like smoke on top of the fire. Who cares?
Oh, it's a good metaphor. As soon as you say that the personal self is an illusion, you have a metaphysical basis for a paradigm. I'm sorry, you can't get around this. And how these folks go to sleep to that fact is astounding to me, given the depth of the real enlightenment. It's
Yeah,
just astounding to me. So, at any rate, once
yeah.
that, go ahead.
No, I was feeling us go back to the nature of the unconscious, and I just want to insert
Yeah.
something here. I did because I wrote an article about this a while back. That was why I read that Freud paper, and I was looking for like what do various aspects of psychology think about how much the unconscious is driving our behavior, and
Uh-huh.
some think quite a lot, and some mostly they don't really define it, and that's what I found really interesting is Edenity says it's way more than half, which is really important, whether it's more than half or less than half, and what there is to do about it then. Because some people say, well, there's quite a lot of your behavior is driven by it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And ta-da, there's no free will. See, which
Yes,
is
that's
what
right.
we've been talking
Yes.
about recently.
Oh my God. Yeah. So to complete that little story arc there,
Mm.
after the event, and when I saw when the divinities um, expanse, a seamless, expansive being returned without discluding the pre-dual. Also, they
Oh,
coexisted.
that must have surprised the hell out of you.
Well, yeah, because that was the first. This is impossible according to the metaphysics of the paradigm I didn't study with,
The
right?
metaphysics of all the paradigms
Of
would say
all the
that's
paradigms,
impossible.
though there is no overlap of non-dual teachings and dual teachings,
Not
Western
without
religions.
eroding both one or the other, where you end up with like
Exactly.
Ashanti sort of tries to straddle the middle, but
Sure.
it's
You
not.
you
Yeah,
can, if you're delicate
yeah,
and detailed, you can straddle the middle.
yeah.
But as soon as that came in, then it also counter illuminated uh, divinity and non-duality coexisted, and then it didn't take very long to realize that what I'm looking at when I see people is in a local personality and a brightly lit back personality behind them of the soul. And that soul, upon the last piece of the realizations, was I saw that it was singular, way more porous than our physicalized version of ourselves, of course, but it is a singular entity that belies all this nonsense about science trying to allow us to live forever. I mean, in the physics, as one gender, in one set of conditioned personalities. I mean, how boring is that? At any
Mm-hmm.
rate, I saw that it was singular across time, and that it was indivisible and eternal. Where everyone out there, forget about trying to live forever as a human. You would be bored to death after 120 or 140 years, I promise you, no matter how good a shape you're in. We already live eternally as the soul. I'm sorry, the same soul reincarnates in different personalities over many, 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 many lifetimes.
Yeah, you know what?
But
It lands on me in this moment that desire to live forever in one life is actually driven by the fear of change.
oh, good call.
It just hit
Yeah.
me like I barely figured this particular life out, and I've you're at 60, 70, whatever, and I got this now, kind of, and I don't
Yeah.
want to do any other configurations of humanity and start over.
We know what the source of that is, as we'll talk about here in the next few unfoldments here. So in that sense, all of a sudden, the individual soul, eternal individual soul, was real, not an illusion, which made then, by counter illumination, the local self that was standing in front of it, full of unconscious material, also real, less real than the soul. And that's where the famous quote came out: everything is real, but some things are more real than others.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking at a local personality that was real, a soul behind it that was realer, and behind the soul, a coarctation of divinity that defined my soul and everyone else's soul as unique and forever, imprinted with divinity's love-based nature.
Did
So
you
there
have
was this
anyone to talk
triad.
to about what you were seeing? That must have been awful.
Well, the only when about if I remember correctly, as I began stumbling about up there in the middle of satsang with this thing that hit me, surely wished it had been a little less embarrassing if it hit me while I was home having a glass of wine or something. But when I had a couple of people come up and help me because I was a little bit of reeling and I had to sit down. And then they said, "What happened?" And all I could do is report what was happening in that moment. And out of my mouth came this, what I just said. There's this triad of realness: real local personality, more real soul, and most real divinity, out of which both of those precipitate. So all of a sudden, that's a whole new paradigm. And in that spirit alone, as you just mentioned, in the divine most real aspect within which the other two were embedded, non-duality and presence of a conscious divine being coexisted. So I could not deny it. Went to my teacher to try to get some clarity. He said the most beautiful, didn't take a position. He would never take a position except about potato chips that precluded its opposite. Identity came out of a what if this is true, and is still to this day based on a what if this is all true. Certainly not as any absolutism. It's to be tested, as we've said so many times in these podcasts. So in that sense, if all of that is true, and after almost 40 years of exploring it and not finding yet any inner or outer contradictions of any fractal of identity that doesn't cohere with every other aspect, we're pretty much in a mode of, well, it is what it is until it isn't, with identity. And
Mm-hmm.
every year that passes by, it becomes more deeply and uncoded, and so it keeps giving us new information that continues to cohere with all the teachings in the past. So we're confident that it's at least experientially good enough to for me to dedicate my entire life to. So, in
Well,
that
just a
sense,
couple of days ago, I was thinking about that Churchill quote that democracy is the worst form of government after all of the others.
uh-huh.
And I was thinking in a moment about identity. Like it's hard. It's the model itself is so beautiful you could paint it on your walls, but the practice of it, the walking of the path, is very
Yeah.
difficult. And I was thinking in that way how identity is the worst paradigm after all of the others.
In that
In
sense,
that
yeah.
way, yeah, because it is
Of course,
difficult.
well, we flip around old Winston's picture and say that democracy is the least worst form
Yeah.
of government relative to resonating with natural human soul-based consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
It is fraught with an enormous amount of seemingly unsolvable conflict. just yesterday, they were in the House of Representatives, the legislative branch of the American government. Two men, one a senator, was threatening to physically beat up another one in session on C-SPAN. Marjorie Taylor, I mean, you just the teenage.
Did you
Uh,
hear? Did you
uh,
hear Mike Johnson? That's the Speaker of the House, right?
yeah, yeah.
Third in line for president. Did you hear this? I don't know whether I hope you have or hope you haven't. He uses an app called Covenant, I think is the name of it. That is an anti-masturbation tracker app where you have a buddy that you help hold you accountable to not using porn and masturbating. Guess, oh, you haven't heard of this. Guess who his buddy is? His
Marjorie
17-year-old
Taylor,
son. No, that
Marjorie,
would be awesome. It was
Marjorie
MTG.
Taylor Greene. No,
No, his buddy on that app is his 17-year-old son. No
oh
joke.
no, oh
Yeah.
no, oh no,
And now this is
oh.
not only is that happening, but now it's public information that that's happening, as if that wasn't wounding the kid enough.
And as
Yeah,
I think we said, let's add another Mike. Is it Michael Johnson? I think, yeah, Michael
Mike
Johnson.
Johnson. Yeah,
Yeah, he has completely redefined. He said it's always been misunderstood, the separation of church and state.
you mentioned that in a previous podcast. Yeah, it was
Yeah, and he
the
came out
separation
and said,
to protect
yeah,
the church. Yeah,
yes, not to protect the state. It was always misunderstood. Of course, that is based on the fact that he has a stern belief that the founding fathers were Christians when they
yeah,
were not.
yeah,
We've said that a dozen times here in these
yeah.
podcasts. So the poor guy is really handicapped in consciousness domains. Third in line of the presidency.
Disabled, developmentally
Disabled.
disabled. Ah,
Developmentally disabled. Yeah. So, I mean,
oh
that
my
doesn't make him
god.
less a child of divinity. That's fine, but
Yeah.
it does make his personality reek a little bit like. No, I won't use that metaphor. For us, for those that have third eye and four and six hooked up in some way, personalities have smells to them. They do
Yes,
for me.
they do.
Anyway,
Smells and textures, and yeah, I just when I yeah, I was just feeling into that. Like I was just wanting to say, think about what kind of consciousness is going on in someone that thinks it's okay to become a let's not masturbate together buddy with your 17-year-old son. And I was just going to think about that. And then I felt actually my soul investigating his soul. And I didn't know I could do
uh-huh.
that. And
Oh
I
yeah.
don't want to do that with him, but I just started to feel like I could ooze into him and actually experience that consciousness. That's
Yeah.
different. That's a sainthood thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Congratulations.
yeah, I'm gonna do that with someone I like instead of
Yeah.
experimenting with him.
Yeah, you it becomes quite odoriferous
Yeah, it's like
if you
climbing into a trash compactor or something.
yeah, and that doesn't mean he's trash, just that his local personality has been conditioned in a certain way to distort reality so deeply that you can't really have a cogent conversation with
Yeah,
him.
because
That's
the
all.
essence of what he's doing with his son is, of course, love, and his
Yeah,
intention is that it's
his
love,
love. Yeah.
but it's twisted up like a ball of twine. Man, wow.
Well, that's a good segue. His
Mhm.
intention is completely honorable in one way to
Uh-huh.
bond in spirit against a human foible that is sinful, right?
Hmm.
Um, oh, by the way, I can't let this go. I can't let this go. It resonates. The Pope just decided.
Oh, I
Uh,
didn't hear this. Tell me.
oh my God! He just decided that he just said it is a sin. It is you will be excommunicated from the Catholic Church if they find out you're a Freemason.
Oh, I did see that. Yes.
That a Freemason, which maybe there's 5 or 6 million of them around the planet, a Freemason has an entirely different worldview and paradigm. Even use the word paradigm
Hmm.
than Roman Catholicism. And I just sat there and I had to hold back a snort, which I was unsuccessful at doing. And because I wanted to say to Francis, look, guy, by your paradigm, Roman Catholics paradigm, every other religion is wrong. And if you're not baptized as a Roman Catholic, they're going to hell. So why would you need to say Freemasons are going to go to hell, basically, because they're against a paradigm, when you would say that evangelical Protestants were also
Prost-
going to hell?
prostitutes.
Every other religion but Catholicism
Yeah.
is going to hell. So
Yeah, that's
you
weird.
can't belong to any of them. Why would you pick out the Freemasons? You see, so he wants his self image is that he's very ecumenical, but to be ecumenical, he has to ignore his own dogma that says every other person who's not baptized a Catholic is going straight to hell. And
Yeah.
so we have more comedy by the leadership of the world here, inherent to the unconscious, let's say. So back to Michael. His conscious intention is reasonable, but if there is up to, in our opinion, an identity up to a 2/3 reservoir of unconscious motives that drive conscious intentions, we can easily deconstruct and help someone find an unconscious motive that is so terrified of not being centered as a human being that they have to overgrip the dogma of a religious teaching that denies very human things like masturbation. Why did the ape? Why was the ape line picked for angel souls to initially, move it into the human domain of consciousness when our hands can reach our crotches?
Yeah, it could
I
have been
mean,
any species. Yeah.
it could have been any. It could have been a snail. Snail can't masturbate unless they drag their digestive
And
area
even then,
above
they move so
within.
slowly, it would be hard to build up any kind of friction.
Exactly right. So, I mean, oh, come on, folks. You have to learn how to relate to this capacity to masturbate. Masturbate. Bree was astonished a couple of weeks ago when I said that the nuns used to just drill it into us as a fifth or sixth grade when the boys started to, that more than three shakes of the penis is masturbation. So when we're standing up as the little kids peeing in the urinal, we had to count our shakes to get it all out and done. Or if it went to four, it was a sin, and you had to go to Saturday. You had to go to confession and confess that you were masturbating.
No
I
way.
mean,
Like, really?
I promise you, this is what we were taught, right?
Wow. What a great image of the invasiveness of that. So, like, you're peeing, you get your lingam in your hand, and you're having to count the shakes because the church is in that urinal there with you.
Right,
Wow.
and that's exactly the framework, Joseph. Uh, get the church out of the bathroom. It
And the
doesn't
bedroom.
belong there, and the
Yeah.
bedroom. Yes, exactly right. So, in that sense, there's all this unconscious material that only needs to reach for religious absolutism, scientific absolutism, transhumanistic absolutism. All absolutisms are a teratomic cancer of human consciousness. Identity would offer that no one, no matter how divinely inspired, least of all me, has any handle on absolute truth. So by believing that that even divinely inspired writings like Gospels or Korans or Kama Sutras are all divinely inspired and absolute and can't be questioned, is a cancer of consciousness.
Yeah, in Islam, I just have to mention they double down because there's lots of holy scripture that say this is the absolute word of God. But as far as I know, Islam's the only one that says, and this is the last word.
Yes.
There will be no prophets after this one. Oh my God. Yeah. Talk about pride and hubris for a paradigm that's against pride. To say yeah, Muhammad was the last prophet, there can be no one. How it's so arbitrarily absolute. It wasn't even necessary. Right?
No,
it wasn't necessary at all because nobody else says that.
No, but it's equivalent to Christianity that says our God was spermlessly birthed. That's
and it's
just
implied.
As absurd.
It's implied. Yeah, Christianity doesn't say there will be no prophets after Jesus, but it is kind of implied because it's like we're waiting for him to come back. We're not waiting for someone else. So
that's right.
I guess it is the same.
He's the Son of God and the Son of Man together in some mysterious way, just like the host is wheat and the body of Jesus at the same time.
That's why if you have an allergy, you can't eat it. I will laugh about that until the day I die. We covered that in a previous one.
God.
If you have celiac disease, it proves that the whole Catholic Church has to be dismantled because you're allergic to the body of Christ, unless you're also allergic to the body of Christ. And not just, it could be.
It hurts to laugh.
That's what they would have to say. Mr. Priest, I ate the host and I had an allergic reaction. I got this sore throat and I'm only allergic to wheat. Oh, well, you must also be allergic to the body of Christ. That's what they have to say. Because we changed that shit. That wasn't a wafer.
I see an entertainment skit where
it wouldn't be very long. I don't know where else to go with that.
No, it would be like a Monty Python short moment.
Yeah, and you could do it with the blood and the wine too. Like, oh, well, you got drunk, you drank a bunch of the wine. Well, that's because Jesus's blood is like malt liquor, man. It's really strong stuff.
Okay. Enough of tilting at windmills here. So they say.
Sorry.
So, no, that's great. If you can't, you got to half laugh, half cry about all this stuff. So we're not being elitist here. We're just being sad with a smile on our face at how tragic this all everything we're saying is, these positions.
Okay, only because nobody knows their testing paradigm, or not. Some people do. Most people, they don't realize their testing paradigm, so they then have to engage in this sort of circus act of over committing because there's no meta to. I don't know what's true. I'm trying out this absolute word of God thing to see if that's going to work for me. Then it wouldn't create this clownish absurdity where people are having to double down on, no, I really am absolutely sure this is true, when deep inside they are terrified that they're not, that it's not.
Only an equally doubting inner person would need the warm blanket of an absolutism. To take them out of their deep and abiding existential insecurity and non-confidence. They need to hang their hat on it.
Yeah, and we're saying that is an aspect of their unconscious that they are responsible. That's a whole other layer that we haven't really gotten to. That it's there and running your life is a big statement. That you're responsible for doing something about it as a whole second clause.
When I first started talking about this, Joseph, back in the day, I'll never forget somebody in the audience. It was a small audience in a library. Said, "That's so unfair."
That's the right reaction.
And I said, "Exactly. That's exactly what your unconscious would say."
Yeah.
And he said, "No, that's my conscious me." And I said,
"Nope.
Are you sure?" At any rate, if it's not, let's take a half step back and lead our way right into that.
Okay.
Thank you. It's one thing to say that 2/3 of our consciousness reservoir we're not aware of driving unconscious motives driving our conscious intentions, meaning the you that is conscious is not your realist you. And of course, there's no spiritual tradition that says you have to that you're secondarily responsible for the contents of that unconscious. Once after everything divine being and personal reality came back to me, somebody in a sagehood teaching moment, someone asked me, "Well, would a guru?" When a guru enlightens to the illusion of duality, how the self is held as a noun, we would say nowadays in that language, he used a different phrase.
Yeah.
But would he have to undo all the dualities in his unconscious? And I said, great question. Any Zen person here want to answer this? And some person raised their hand. I think it was a woman and said, no. Because once they are aware of the illusion of all dualities, you don't have to confront every duality, conscious or unconscious, in you to have them all dissolve and the immolation of your attachments to your illusion.
And that's
And
the
I said,
very definition of spiritual bypassing right there.
exactly right. And
What'd you
so
say?
that would, yes, absolutely, that great call, because that is internally resonant with their paradigm.
Yeah.
That you only need to recognize the totality of duality as illusory and never look at the content of the
Wholesale.
dualities,
Yeah,
right?
it's a wholesale dismissal. Mm-hmm.
A wholesale dismissal. So I wound up saying that. I said, "Thank you. That you represented your paradigm beautifully."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "Represented the paradigm beautifully."
Oh
And I
boy.
said, "Oh, it's a paradigm now." Oh, wait, no, I mean,
That's
she
not what
just
I meant, right?
she took a bowel move, an etheric bowel movement in that moment. You know, it slipped right out of her mouth. And at
Mm-hmm.
any rate, okay, what does that mean? So if we backtrack just a little, there's a soul you that is upstream of your local conditioning, and your conditioning created and is soulfully relative to the soul, your soul's consciousness, a soulfully inauthentic version of yourself that got conditioned into believing that everything you're conscious, that your whole being is what you're conscious of. Because no one, your parents or your society or your family or your culture, didn't inform you that your local personality is just a downstream version of your individuated soul. They might teach it in the church on Sunday, but they certainly don't teach it in everyday life as a child, learning how to be what an identity means.
I
Right?
have an example here. I was just talking to a client this morning who is he's with his second wife, and both of the women that he married uh, during the course of the marriage acquired a pretty rare and debilitating disease that causes them to be very dependent on him. Content of it doesn't really matter, but the result of that is it's like being a single parent, and he's got still one kid who's around 12 or 13, and his wife's just not able to do a whole lot and needs a lot of supervision because bad things could happen if she could, her blood pressure can just drop really precipitously. And so fascinatingly, he's been married twice, and both of these women have had this very rare disease. And so what I was talking with him
Wow.
about today was like,
Wow.
well, what happens if you put on the lens of that you chose this somehow?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, chose it. He's like, I choose to stay with her every day. That's what I've chosen. I go, yeah. But if you consider that it can't be luck that you ended up with this twice, why would you have chosen this unconsciously? What would it be that you're supposed to learn?
Right. Right.
And that's an example of taking responsibility for the
Yes.
contents of your unconscious. And he did not like it at first at all.
Yeah.
But where we ended up with it was really cool. He saw how much of his life and his hardships have actually forced him to move from a pretty irresponsible, punky kind of kid to a highly
Mm-hmm.
responsible person destined to be a leader of men. And that's what it forced him to do. And I was like, so do you think if both of your wives that you've had weren't very dependent? Oh, by the way, he also has a son who I think is 12 or 13, who is on the autism spectrum. So
Oh
even
boy.
more
Mhm.
dependence, right? So it forced him to grow up really, really fast. And I said, if you didn't have these configurations going on, what
Right.
do you think your
Right.
life would have been like? He's like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I would have stayed a punky, over aggressive kid. I was like, well, maybe your soul
Yeah.
knew that this is
Hmm.
what you needed in order to grow up and chose these difficult circumstances like a weight you could lift to get stronger.
Right.
Fortunately, at
Wow.
the end, he was pleased about the conversation because I thought he was going to hang up on me in the middle.
Well, and now that you told that beautiful story, it's important to note for the listeners that what we assay and evaluate as the unconscious and ways to unfold it into the conscious, very unique ways of doing that. It's important to note that the unconscious is both emotional, local emotional wound based
Mm-hmm.
and spiritual unknowns that you've forgotten in before with the incarnational imperatives that you set your life's compass for in this any one lifetime. So here was a great example of an incarnational imperative that was necessary for him to move from that state as a punky teenager to a more self-responsible adult who might be a leader. So it's not just spiritual things that make up the unconscious. It's actually the majority of it, 60, 70% of that two-thirds is emotional wounding based conditioning that was normalized by your family's paradigm of the culture, the family culture, the family
Culture, nice, yeah.
culture,
And
right?
I see those as that's the knots in the hose, the knots of the
Yes,
emotional wounds that are kinking up
right.
the soul hose.
Exactly. And this is why psychologists who can't imagine why a 22-year-old would all of a sudden acquire an M16 and start shooting into a bar when they had lovely parents who loved them. In fact, they were even God-fearing Christians, by the
Oh,
way.
yeah. Hmm.
And they would think, where did this come from? Either the devil's got him or he's got some neurological disease that alters his value system or something. They don't realize how much being raised by a fundamentalist Christian culture of a family
Yeah.
is going to have to repress so many aspects of nominal natural humanity, like masturbation, for example, like we were
Hmm.
saying, that it gets all pent up in the unconscious when the child doesn't realize how twisted their conditioning is becoming, how anti-human such a culture of a family would impart to the child. And so one day that snaps, and by God, he's got to take it out on somebody, how his own humanity has been denied to him in some semi conscious way.
Well, and there's a sort of
So
corollary there is that a parent is responsible for the contents of their child's unconscious,
that
kind
is
of, like
something that
largely.
uh, what I started, thank you for reminding me of that. I forgot completely. At one time only, I actually said a similar thing,
Hmm.
and that elicited such gasps of and wait, you mean you're blaming parents for all of the kids bad things, and then I had to really backtrack that's not blaming the parent as much as blaming holding a parent responsible for what they're unconscious of in imparting to the kids.
I want
So
to answer something here before I forget, because there's been a few different times I wanted to get this. What Edenity can show you, specifically the emotional body and soulman process, because if we're making it sound like that taking responsibility, it can sound like a willful set of work to do. But I think it's a useful distinction to make. The soul in human embodiment just does this. A,
yes,
a soulful parent would automatically be curious infinitely, if that's
yes,
possible, about their impact on their kid. They wouldn't
right,
have to do it. It would just happen. And
yes,
the inverse of that, that has been sort of present, I've been wanting to say this since the beginning of the episode here. The inverse of that is that the unconscious protector in us actively wants to keep the unconscious unconscious.
yes,
It's not
mm-hmm.
a passive thing. And
No,
you will discover this
Mm-hmm.
In your EBE experience, if you choose to embark upon it, you will see that it's like it's not accidental or incidental. It's
Right.
it the fact that 98% of the paradigms on the planet are constructive, building on top of a set of knowns and absolutes. That's not an accident. The
Yeah.
protector is very much making sure that no one looks
Yes.
at the man behind the curtain.
Exactly.
Leave that alone. The unconscious, if there is one, it doesn't influence that much. If it does influence much, there's not much you can do about it anyway. Hey, maybe there's no even free will. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain and just see what you can do to improve the mess you already now are now, rather than burn that down and reinvent it, which is what EBE is.
Yeah, beautifully said. It's not an exaggeration to say if you don't burn down deconstruct, let's say, the version of your protection, you are largely two-thirds in embodiment right now. Not only two-thirds, because the soul can't be completely shadowed out. It'll come out and around, above and below your compensatory protector, as Joseph just described it. So it's a mix, but it's a mix that protector is intentional, wants to keep it unconscious, which is why you have to we have to help deconstruct it for the soul behind that inauthentic version of yourself. And we don't do it by trying to break its spine. We do it by honoring why it had to exist in the first place to create all that unconscious.
Which it usually
90% of
doesn't
it.
even really know or remember
No,
itself.
it doesn't. It starts too young. Mine started before I was the age of 1 with some inappropriate touching that happened to me as an infant. And so it'll start that soon, where something has to armor over to get through the present moment and overwhelms the innocent largesse of an infant's consciousness. So, what does this all mean in a day-to-day way here is that if we're saying as a pivotal piece of the tripod of the foundational assumptions, metaphysical assumptions of identity, that we are responsible for the contents of our unconscious, what that means is that you will consciously reap what you unconsciously sow. In other words, the way you're forced to be responsible for it is that karma will take care of that for you. What we call karma is simply that which you consciously reap. Bad karma, anyway, is what you consciously reap for what you unconsciously sow. So only by exposing and illuminating as much of the unconscious as possible are you going to one day eliminate what you would call, or what we've been calling, bad karma, bad outcomes. Like, why do I have 2 wives, for example, who have a similar disability that way? Well, is this an emotionally wounded based thing, or is it a spiritual incarnational imperative thing? In his case, it was a spiritual incarnational imperative. But for a lot of us, when we see that we go through relationships like diarrhea goes through after eating a fish taco, for example.
Oh, you had a lot of choices of food there. You went with fish
Yeah,
taco.
right. A bad fish taco,
It was
let's say.
implied, but yeah.
Yeah, full of mercury, maybe, and
Oh man.
At any rate, what'll
Last
happen
week's
here?
fish taco.
Last week's, yeah. Thank you, Joseph. That's better. I love fish tacos, by the way, but got to be careful. Got to go to
Yes.
a reasonable place that you trust the freshness. So at this point,
That was so not you in that moment. That was so like you just channeled that joke. That was really funny.
Oh, thank you. These things come in and out of me so fast I can't track. So thanks for the
Yeah.
reflection. Yeah. At any rate, so those of us that are, when you are bordering on, if you have a paradigm that's touched by the East and there's an reincarnation feature to your paradigm, and as you have many lifetimes, you don't clear your karma for murdering someone necessarily by being murdered by someone. It's not an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. It's that if you murder someone, if this is an anti-life thing, when you murder someone else, it means you've already killed some part of you that would be morally and conscience wise unable to do such an act if it was measured and not reactive in a defensive moment.
I want to
So,
seize a moment from just a second ago, because there's an implication in the responsibility that we're responsible for the contents of our unconscious, of course, comes to bear directly on what triggers are and what there is to do with them, as we
yes.
talked about recently. And this is the perfect segue for a poem that I wrote in the last week that I wanted to read. And
Okay.
I wrote this. I was so triggered, I was unable to sleep about, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago. Well, my emails tell me, because I wrote in an email to myself 4 days ago. I wrote this at 2 a.m, and it's supposed to be read in a poetry slam kind of voice. So here we go.
Okay.
Trigger warning. The following may elicit feelings you don't want to feel. It may remind you of things you don't want to think about. It may call for you to examine uncomfortable aspects of yourself that you work hard to ignore. Trigger warning. You may experience vulnerable emotions like hurt, anxiety, anguish, and shame. Emotions that have been inside you since you were a child, when you were so alone with these emotions that you swore you'd never feel them again. So you turned into another person and left your soul behind, because you knew how precious it was. Too
Yes.
precious for the closed, callous hearts of your parents. Trigger
Yes.
warning. So you performed and pretended to get along as a false version of yourself, adopting distorted values that would help you hide your soul. Notions like sacrifice and altruism, happiness and caretaking, letting things go before you feel them through, believing or disbelieving in the God you used to feel, and playing victim to realities such that you would expect a trigger warning. No one is responsible for your emotional safety unless you are a child. Trigger
Yes.
warning. You have a
Yes.
contribution to every experience you don't like. Trigger
Yes.
warning. This reality may offend you, and that is your opportunity to get curious about how deep your wounds go, such that you need someone or something else to be a certain way for you to be okay. Trigger warning. Life is chaotic, impermanent, and extremely experimental. Species that lived here before were in fact destroyed in a mass extinction event, which could easily happen again. Trigger warning. You cannot know anything absolutely, and only your fear and pain would cause you to try. Trigger warning. You are responsible for the contents of your unconscious, and the worst experiences of your life are the best ways to learn about it. Trigger warning. You don't need a trigger warning, because triggers aren't bad. What they trigger isn't bad. Why they trigger it isn't bad. When they trigger it is the exact right time, and where is the exact right place. Your triggers are gifts from God to help you reclaim your soul. Trigger warning. Now, why would you want to be warned about that?
Oh, beautiful. Nice closure there. Just linking from right to the beginning there. Wow. Again, one of the loveliest dimensions of this podcast series is how Joseph will really, we say this over and over again, bring the teaching rubber to the road of raw human experience. And how I would just simply honor what so beautifully and passionately that poem says, Joseph, is that you can measure the degree of your unconscious by either how big of a trigger reactions you have to life or their utter absence. Because you could say you have an utter, if you have no big, strong reactions to anything in life, you're either transcended, enlightened in an old, traditional, imperfect way, or you're so numbed down by your protector self, you're not letting yourself have big reactions, because that would mean you would have, that means you have a spiritual self image. And on the other side, if the degree you are triggered, as Joseph just intimated, the degree you're triggered is the degree of your woundedness. And thank God for the trigger, because without it, you wouldn't have the chance to explore a piece of your unconscious.
Yeah, that's one of the primary answers to Freud's question: how do you make the unconscious unconscious? You follow your triggers.
You follow those. I used to call it track your reacts. You know,
Ah, nice.
track your reacts. That's the best way to know. You start opening the door to the unconscious, because they're chock full of emotive juice, and they are powerful, and
I
they
don't
will
even remember
instruct.
what the trigger was. Oh, actually, the timing of the email says it was 12:30 a.m. So this was 12:30 a.m. I couldn't sleep because I was so triggered. That came through me. That was the first draft. That is unedited. That's just how I tapped it out on my phone in bed.
Mhm.
And then I went to sleep. And by the time I woke up in the morning, I got into the bottom of it. It took me, I woke up and about 20 minutes later, it was like, oh, that's what it was. So it was
Yeah.
like, that was a funny thing because some protector in me was really trying to play victim to the trigger and be
Uh-huh.
justified about it. And
Right.
so my soul wrote me a poem to snap me out of it because it thought it was like, no, no, this is your chance. This is
Yeah.
your chance.
Oh, how
So
beautifully rendered, Joseph, to bring the principle of identity into real, hard, beautiful focus, what it really means over and above the challenging framework of it. We're responsible for what I'm unconscious of. So let's close that up with what that person's first reaction was, when she said, "This is so unfair."
yeah,
Um, well, unfair to whom and to what? It's unfair to our protector who wants to keep these things all under wraps, because when they first went through the experience that they're now triggered back to, there was no way to emotively digest the pain of that moment. And
yeah.
so it's frozen in time. These are frozen structures of moments that add to the armor, a little like mosaic tiles to your armor of the protector self. They're reasonable, they were there, but they literally, in the end, limit our capacity to live soulfully and wholefully, to our a destiny.
I just got
So
this image of like the because the protector really has this worldview that repressing the unconscious must be done, and it's like the name of the game. Like that's part like an existential aspect of existence.
yeah,
And it's so completely backward because actually the design of existence is it's constantly trying to help us see our
yes.
unconscious through triggers, through outcomes that we draw, all of that. And I just got this image of like the protectors trying to like dry someone off while they're under a shower.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it's
Oh
just it's you
nice.
or like mop a floor while sewage is getting pumped in like forever. It's just it's a losing battle, and that's the human condition. It's just
Yeah,
we think that this is what we're supposed to do is ignore all that stuff, and it will not be ignored.
yeah.
It's tragic.
It is. So exactly in all these ways, what you could react immediately and say, that's so unfair. uh, Identity responds, that life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you, right? And you'll hear people hold that as a maxim, but to feel and embody that truth requires access to the largesse of your soul version of self that is healably emergent as
Yeah.
you deconstruct and heal the protector self. Our goal, no one, not me, not anyone, at least in not my experiences in this lifetime anyway, the goal was never to be 100% healed of your protector. It's to reverse, in the minimum, the percentage so that one day, and this is possible, we have proofs of this all the time, that where it is possible to have a two-thirds soulful version and continually be working with the one-third of the protector, that will always show itself. The brighter the soul presence becomes, it will
Mm-hmm.
keep illuminating darker and darker shadows into gray, from black to gray and gray to white. And that's exactly what we do in identity, both in a personhood way, sagehood way, and a sainthood way.
Yeah, this idea because I hear it a lot. In fact, I have one of my service professionals. Their signature, one of their signatures is everything in life happens for you. But the only paradigm I know that really can make that a applied,
Yes,
operationalized, lived
yes,
experience
right,
is
right,
identity. Because the only other way I know how to do it, if you can't access the unconscious and see exactly how and why you're drawing things and then emotively process it, then it's
right.
either a transcendent kind of well, I'll just let go and trust that everything is for me,
Yeah.
even though I can't
Yes.
actually feel
Right.
that or directly
Right.
experience it.
Right.
That could be transcendent east or west, or it's a mental reframe of like, well,
Yeah.
my house burned down. I guess that's an opportunity to build another house. It's like, well, where did that happen? Like, is that's in your
Yeah.
mind? Like,
Yeah. Right.
is that true, or did you just make
Yeah.
that up out of your imagination? It's not necessarily
Right.
based in soul level truth.
Yeah. So if let's close with the opposite. If you don't take responsibility for the content of your unconscious, then you will be reducing your soulful incarnation this lifetime to the values and playouts of your protector self, and in that way only live about a third of your capacity. And in that way, it's not, you can't say you're wasting your incarnative opportunity if you don't take responsibility, but it certainly does limit your options, because all you'll have to your go-to thing, just like Joseph just said, is going to be some mentalized, behavioralized, self-imageized play out of that maxim, that life is for us. So you've got to get into the unconscious to actually embody it. Embody it. So this is a really hard one for most people to take in as a linchpin of identity. But without
It's a
it,
hard one for me, and I've been working to embody it for 14, 15 years. It's still hard sometimes because
yeah,
every notch it becomes like, okay, I think I got it now. Then you find more unconscious stuff. I mean, it's one of the
yeah,
most
but
brutal truths of that's why it's in the top three list, I think.
exactly right. And as I say, it will continually unfold such that the blackest unconscious will turn gray. Then you work it and work it and work it, and then it becomes light. It transmutes literally. And then you reclaim your soulful heritage as a human being on earth.
Hmm. Well, I can't think of a better way to close than with those words. So next time, I don't know what we're gonna do next time. Let me open up that file real quick here. What do we got left? Um, that your heart is almost entirely closed compared to how open it could be.
That's
Is
sort of a sequela of what we
yeah.
just talked
I was
about.
just thinking. I don't think it deserves its own. I think it's too
Yeah,
derivative of others.
yeah.
What about then the last one? The only one on this list that we haven't covered is it just seems like an apropos closing. Love is not what we think. Want to talk about the nature of love and how it's not what we think while we're conditioned?
Let's do that. Great, perfect. Let's do that.
Let's let's have that
And I
be our
and
last one.
I have an agenda for a following one, that is,
More.
yeah, but not a realization, a brand new unfoldment of Identity's emoto spiritual dharma, a brand new development.
I can't.
Uh,
I can't. I don't want to wait.
well, let's
Let's
talk
record
about
that
love.
right now.
We did two in a row here, 2 days in a row.
Well,
No, yeah,
if it's a cliffhanger for me, then hopefully it will be for our listeners as well, and they'll have to wait till next time.
yeah.
Tune in
And
next time to find out.
it's a harbinger, Joseph, for the future, and how it will likely not take us pioneers 14 years to soulify.
Well,
Uh,
that's certainly, yeah, that seems to be. I look forward to the day where we can maybe even be so bold as to advertise, in quotes, some kind of like, and we're pretty darn sure it's not going to take you 10, 15, 20 years to get to X,
right.
Y, and Z.
Yeah, since I did the whole identity track backwards, it's taken me almost 40 years to complete the three hoods and soulmates as an embodied being. So uh, I've been the worst case lab rat. It's taken me the longest. 14 years. Joseph is. There are other people who have done a little more, but not much than that. And most everyone else in their current semi community is just starting out, or after only maybe 3 to 4 years working at it right now. And so there
And
was
they're
no way
already
to.
twice as fast as the last generation. Yeah, that's for sure.
Exactly. This is exponential. It's not arithmetic, and the time is not the issue. Since we could do another podcast on how you could call gravity love and time, God.
Mm-hmm.
That's another really interesting one. So I'd like to do a podcast, and it will fit into a 90-minute or slightly
Okay.
more than 90-minute context. So,
All right. We'll do that after Love Is Not What We Think, which will be the next time.
yes.
Episode that'll be 81, which is a really cool number. And
Uh-huh.
until then, thank you, Stace. These realizations have been a joy to do. And we got one more to do. Thanks for everything. Thanks for Identity. Thanks for bringing it to the world. There's not a week that goes by where I don't gain a greater sense of just how much that was and is to bring. So I keep appreciating you more on deeper and deeper levels.
Well, the true measure of the gratitude, I accept that. I can now take that in without flinching too much. But the true where the rubber meets the road on that one is how many other souls you help find their way to their own destinies and soulful outcomes of life. That's the best gratitude.
Yep.
Is I used to say that early on that I was like one of those park rangers with the binoculars in the hides way up in the mountains with the binoculars, and that I was a fire spotter. And what I would be able to do with third eye and 60% and fourth chakra 40%, I could see from a mile away or 10 miles away a soul that was going to or has already exhausted their paradigmatic array of change, growth, and change, and they were ripe for an introduction to identity. Mm-hmm. And Joseph was one of those souls that I saw from, well, you said 30 miles away on the mountaintop, and saw the flame of Joseph's soul, and said, "Oh boy, he's plowing. He's still plowing with an oxen instead of a tractor."
Yes, I
said,
was.
Oh, he's gonna max out on that one in the next year or two. So, thank you for being one of the bright lights in this paradigm to help me see that I wasn't absolutely insane.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. Okay. All right. Yeah, until next time, wish you well on your journey. Bye for now. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you in episode 81. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Edenity, please visit edenity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.